Tēnā koutou katoa, nau mai haramai, ki konei mo tēnei hoi. Nā te mihi tino mihi atu ki a koe, i te kuru matua, me ngā mema o te kani hera puki, me te kaimahi o tēnei tari. So welcome everybody to this, our policy and planning meeting. We're going through today our oral submissions. We've already had karakia this morning, and so we don't need to do that. I feel like I see nearly everybody around the table for members of this meeting. So there are no apologies. Through our public forum, we don't have a public forum today, so we can move on from that. Just a reminder to everybody about any conflicts of interest. And the opportunity to either say so now or you're able to do that through the meeting. Confirmation of an order of business. I'm going to hand this. No, that's nil. Everything is exactly the same. Excellent. And so 6 is reports for information. I'm going to hand this over to Jenna to take us through this.
Thank you. So as you'll know, we went out for consultation on our 2 gambling policies. The one in regards to pokies or class 4 as well as TAB venues. We received 14 submissions and 5 of those submitters have chosen to speak at the hearing today.
Excellent. Thank you, Jenna. Well, we can move straight along.
Yep, what I'll do is I'll let your first submitter who is online into the meeting. Just joining now. And if you need to know, we're running ahead.
Oh.
So she's ready to say further.
Kia ora, Madeleine. Tēnā koe, welcome.
Kia ora.
Kia ora. We're running ahead of time, which is great. And if you're ready, we're happy to take your submission. Just a reminder that you have 10 minutes. Sure. Within that time period, there's an opportunity for councillors to ask questions. I can let you know when we get to about 8 minutes if you're still presenting.
Yep, that would be great.
Okay, but if you go over that and it goes past the 10 minutes, I'm sorry, that is the process. But yep. Just to welcome you and your colleague to the Rangitikei District Council for you today. So welcome.
Thank you.
I'll pass it over to you.
Sure. I'm just setting up the slideshow just now.
So you want to share your screen?
Excellent. When you're ready, Madeleine?
Yeah, okay, that's great. Can you see the slideshow?
Yes.
Yeah, you can. Oh, that's awesome. Kia ora tātou, ko Madeleine Cullen tōku ingoa, no te arawa ko te rana me ai rana ahau. He kai tātari kaupapa haere ahau ki PGF, tēnā koutou katoa. Morena, my name is Madeleine Cullen. I whakapapa to the Te Arawa Waka. I am also of Scottish and Irish descent. And I am the policy advisor at PGF Services. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present this afternoon. And yeah, we'll just get started. So firstly, I would just like to draw attention to gambling harm and how that is experienced, as it can often be misrepresented by the gambling industry. The Ministry of Health describes gambling harm as occurring on a continuum, starting at low or mild harm through to moderate and severe harm at the pointy end of the scale. Those who may be facing struggles like lack of money to pay important bills or arguments at home due to their gambling, although classed as mild, these people are still experiencing very real harm. Similarly, a regular gambler repeatedly withdrawing from an ATM in a pokie venue also showing signs of anxiety, may be classed as low down on the gambling harm continuum, but is already very much in the grips of harm. Intervention at these early stages is critical, not just to prevent further damage, but to stop the escalation before the harm becomes severe. Addressing gambling harm early can make all the difference in preventing irreversible consequences. And the gambling harm industry often focus their approach on harm minimization at the pointy end of the continuum. And that represents those who are experiencing severe harm. Now, at this stage, the gambler may have already lost their home, their relationship, their job, and may well be experiencing suicidal ideation. But by this stage, we're dealing with crisis. And it's widely accepted that the best approach is a public health approach, where efforts are focused on harm prevention rather than picking up the pieces when gambling harm has become severe. The Ministry of Health estimates that the number of people experiencing mild, moderate, or severe gambling harm is more than 250,000. So for perspective, that's more than the population of Wellington. Today, we're focusing on pokies, the most harmful form of gambling in Aotearoa. Class 4 gambling, which includes pokies found in pubs, clubs, and TABs, is a high-risk, high-turnover form of gambling. It continues to cause the most damage in New Zealand and remains the primary reason that people seek help from gambling-related harm. The majority of money spent on gambling in New Zealand comes from a relatively small group of people who regularly play pokie machines. A New Zealand gambling study revealed that 30% of pokie losses stem from those identified as problem or moderate risk gamblers. Alarmingly, 1 in 5 people who play pokies are classed as low risk, moderate risk, or problem gamblers. The risk of harm rapidly increases for those who play pokies more often, and research shows that over 50% of those who play pokies at least once a month experience some form of gambling harm. This is not just a statistical concern, it's a public health issue that affects the well-being of communities across the motu, including Rangatike. In 2024, the residents of the Rangatike district collectively lost $55.6 thousand per pokie machine. Now, this is a staggering amount, especially when you consider that the median income for residents in the district is just $36.6 thousand a year. Furthermore, all of the Class 4 venues in the Rangatike district are located in high or median high deprivation areas. This means that the money being lost is likely being lost from those in the Rangatike community who can least afford to lose it. We also know that gambling harm disproportionately impacts Māori living in the region, and Māori experience harmful gambling differently, and this disparity has not changed over the years. This is a systemic issue that is unequitable and unethical, and it highlights the need for targeted, culturally appropriate intervention services and support. Over half of all councils in Aotearoa, New Zealand have already implemented a sinking lid policy, and this is considered the best available measure for minimising gambling harm in our communities. While sinking lids are effective, it does not go far enough or move fast enough to reduce harm where it's needed the most. In particular, the number of pokies in high deprivation areas where the harm is most severe are not reducing. So we strongly encourage councils to advocate for greater control over the number of pokies in their communities and to push for further reforms at a national level to minimise the damage that these pokies cause. It's often claimed that a sinking lid will result in reduced community funding, but this is simply not true. A sinking lid policy only works when a venue is closed, and that process takes a long time. Meanwhile, spending on pokies continues to rise nationally each year. With this, we urge Rangatike Council to opt for option 2, the sinking lid policy. And further to this, we ask Rangatike to consider a sinking lid without relocations or club mergers, as this is the best way to ensure that the number of pokies continues to decline over time and to reduce harm for those most vulnerable. You'll no doubt hear from Class 4 societies and trusts, along with those who receive grants from these trusts, and we acknowledge that many of these grants are for very worthy causes, but collectively we need to think about where the money is coming from. With over 60% of pokie venues located in medium-high or high deprivation communities, that money is coming from people who can't afford to lose it. Funding communities based on a system that relies on our lowest income households, putting money they can ill afford to lose into pokie machines, is both unethical and inequitable. And the saturation of Class 4 venues in areas of high social deprivation and the resulting harm placed on these communities is known to be disproportionately borne by Māori whānau. Research commissioned by the DIA revealed that the funding system has a very redistributive effect from more deprived communities to less deprived communities. In other words, more well-off communities provide 26% of the money from the pokies, but receive 88% of the grants. Conversely, less well-off communities provide 74% of the money from pokies, but receive only 12% of the grants.
Kia ora, Madeline, just to say you've got 2 minutes left.
Okay. While we do know that there's been an increase in online gambling, there is no evidence to suggest that a sinking lid policy causes people to switch from pokies to online gambling, nor does it appear to accelerate the transition. Currently, there are no studies in New Zealand tracking the migration patterns of pokie players to online platforms. But what we do know that is during the online gambling spiked during COVID-19, and after the lockdown, we did see that there was an increase of 116% in pokie spending from June to September 2020. So that does reflect that there was a movement from the online gambling back to the Class 4 gambling as it has once been. Online gambling is due to be looked at again in 2026, and we're due to see 15 online gambling operators introduced by the government. It remains to be seen if this will impact spending on pokies. But what we do know for certain is the damaging nature of pokie machines and the significant harm that they are causing in our communities. So for this reason, we do urge TK to favour policy option 2, a sinking lid, to mitigate these harms. Thank you so much for letting us share this with you today. Did anyone have any patai? Sorry, I know I'm close to the very end now.
Thank you, Madeline. We've probably got an opportunity for one question. Anyone around the table? Simon, Councillor Simon.
Thank you. Just curious, you've said that that there was a $3,245,000 loss in the Rangitikei community. But I also read somewhere that 91% gets returned to player of the pokie machine. So does that include winnings at all that come back into the community? I'm just getting an idea of the scale here.
Do you want me to answer
Yeah,
that? Yes, that means the GMP, or the gross machine product, profit, is the money that is after they've taken all the prizes out of it and all the winnings. And the 91% is actually used by the industry. It's a bit misleading because that's over the life of the machine, of the game. You know, the 91 cents that comes back to a player, they're still losing money. And it's very, very, it is a very, very confusing way to look at it. Essentially, what we know is that, you know, we're losing nationally over $1 billion on pokies, but about 300 odd million goes back to the communities in the form of grants. A lot of money is sucked up into the system. So, of course, you've got to pay a slice to the venues, to the pokie trusts for costs. There's tax included as well. So the 91 cents is what does actually get returned to the player, but it's sort of through the life cycle. You know, it doesn't mean that one person going in there is going to get 91 cents back, if you know what I mean.
Thank you very much for your presentation, and we've gone past our 10 minutes. We will be back in touch with you once the decisions have been made. So thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we're going to just welcome Justin, Tēnā Justin, you're our second presenter. So Justin, I'm sure you've been here enough times to know how it works. 10 minutes for your we know 8 minutes. If you've any questions, and I'll hand that time over to you. Thank you.
Madam Chair, Your Worship, councillors. I'll take my submission as read. I've just got a few brief points I'm going to reinforce, and then I'll just yield the rest of my time for this if there's any questions. When I initially thought about my verbal submission, I had intended on just pulling my phone out and showing you using your Wi-Fi and my phone playing pokies online, but I decided I wasn't going to do that, and you can just take my word for it, and I hope you check your Wi-Fi. It doesn't allow people to do that, or you investigate yourselves, or whatever you're supposed to do under the law. And the other brief point I just want to make that I found intriguing is licence applicants having to provide 12-month business plans to council. I had quite a visceral initial response to that, and the words I want to use, I'm not going to use, but I'll put it bluntly and just say it's one of the things I would not be providing to you. You're not judges of that. And why would I give away anything that innovations I would want my business to the public record? So yeah, I'll leave it to questions.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Justin. Oh, well, thank you. First question. Thank you, Mayor Andy.
Yeah, thanks very much, Justin. Justin, did you write this submission, or is this a submission generated by AI or some other platform?
I wrote this, but I used the AI to try and get it a bit more coherent and in order. I had trouble getting the ordering right
Yeah,
and making sense.
I sort of sense you struggled there a little bit.
Yeah.
But if you were to summarise what your result that you are looking for is what?
I guess my biggest issues come around continual restriction when people don't learn how to people don't get the skills to be able to cope with or learn how to deal with these sorts of things if we just continuously remove the exposure of it. On top of that, we've also got, when you do create that exposure to that, you'll basically start to, I think the word I use in there is commoditize. You make it a competitive advantage to someone who has got it versus someone who doesn't have it, which is kind of the opposite of what you're trying to achieve if you're talking about reducing harm, because you're just adding more money value to things. And when I read through it, and you know, I've sat in some of these meetings, it sounds like the information is whatever is happening in the Rangitikei district seems to be working slightly better than other places with the sinking lid thing. That's why I led to some kind of population-based ratio, because in my mind there has to be something there that's showing that there is a line here somewhere where there is benefits versus other places. And the other thing that came to mind was that I guess maybe a lower population base versus the number of machines must be the way it sort of would work. And if the population increased, then the potential is there for the number of pokies to increase without any additional harm. Plus, I'm annoyed that I have to travel 4.5 hours to go to a casino, personally.
Supplementary question. So you're effectively saying you support a cap, but it should be targeted on the basis of some form of population factor.
Yeah, I don't. Yes, because that then keeps the target moving as opposed to having a fixed thing that doesn't move.
Yeah, I don't want to take any further time. Let the others.
Thank you. Councillor Simon.
Hi, Justin. Thank you. In your conclusion, you talked about the Rangitaki District Council and how it looks like you feel as though the Rangitaki District Council have responsibilities for changing some social aspects of their behaviour. And I'm just wondering whether that's a local government issue that you're bringing to the fore, or a central government issue that needs to be addressed in central government as opposed to local government?
Most likely, it is probably central government that gets all the levers to be able to pull, but there is a responsibility. Local government still has avenues it can take to facilitate, advise, lead. Central government say, hey, however that gambling law works to come down for your bylaw, this part here does or doesn't seem to work. Because I mean, if the gambling hub was significant and the bylaw, whatever the law is behind the bylaw, was insufficient, you would be saying, hey, this isn't working. But equally, if it is working, council should still be able to sort of go to central government and say, hey, this needs to be tweaked, altered. Yes.
Thank you. Any other questions around the table? No? Oh, well, thank you very much, Justin, for that. And the team will get back to you with, once we've been through this process in the decision making at our next policy and planning meeting. We'll move on to our third submitter. And we are running early. Tinakwe Jared. Tinakwe Jared, welcome to the Rangitaki District Council Policy and Planning Hui for our all submissions to today. The time is yours. You have 10 minutes. Just to say that after 8 minutes, I'll let you know that we're on 8 minutes, and then there's an opportunity if you're still presenting, because within that time frame is when councillors may want to ask you questions. Ka pai?
Excellent, thank you.
Excellent.
I understand that you have my PowerPoint and the staff will assist with flicking through that. Is that correct?
Yes.
Great, thank you. All right, good afternoon. I'm Jared True. I represent the Gaming Machine Association that represents the vast majority of gaming machine societies that operate in New Zealand. We're asking you today to do three things: to expand the relocation provision to enable venues to move to more desirable locations for any reason. We support the status quo cap of 58 machines, which is a cap set at current numbers. And we ask you to reconsider the requirement for relocated venues not to be within 100 metres of an ATM. Next slide, please. In relation to the relocation provision, relocation is, of course, a harm minimisation tool. The ability for us to relocate our venues was introduced by the Maori Party as part of the Gambling Harm Reduction Amendment Bill. And the aim was to enable venues to move away from undesirable areas to more suitable areas. Next slide, please. The current policy allows relocation, but only if the venue cannot continue to operate at its existing site. So a venue is only allowed to relocate in circumstances such as a fire, an earthquake, a flood, or public works acquisition. And in my submission, we should not have to wait for a fire or an earthquake to move a venue to a location that we can demonstrate to council on a case-by-case basis the new location's more desirable from a harm minimisation perspective. Next slide, please. Our venues should be free to move to an area that's considered more suitable, regardless of the reason for the move. If there's a venue that's close to a residential area or close to a sensitive site, that venue should be able to come to council, present a plan as to where it would like to relocate. The new area should be able to be assessed, and if that's considered to be a more suitable site, that council should have the ability to grant that, regardless of the fact that the venue still exists and hasn't been demolished by a fire, a flood, or an earthquake. Importantly, our venues should also be able to move if they can demonstrate that they're moving to newer, modern, smaller premises. Just the next slide, please. Having newer, modern premises helps have a vibrant district. It helps revitalise the business district. It helps improve the local economy, helps to create employment, and helps to encourage tourism. The next 4 slides I'm about to show you are photos of venues that have relocated. So the next slide there was the very first venue that took advantage of the new relocation provision that was introduced. This venue is the Te Rapa Tavern that was in Hamilton, very much a rundown, undesirable venue. That's the outside. The next slide will show you the inside. Old school type pub. Next slide will show you the venue relocated. Over $3 million was spent on a brand new building, brand new fit out, and we have a world-class, fantastic facility, a great asset to the Te Rapa district. The next slide will show you the modern sports bar look inside. Next slide, please. It's also important from a health and safety basis to enable our venues to relocate for any reason. If a venue is earthquake prone, it should be able to relocate without waiting for a fire or an earthquake. If we don't allow a relocation, that doesn't lead to less machines. It just simply entrenches venues in unsafe premises. Just next slide in relation to your cap. Your current cap that you've got is entirely reasonable, doesn't allow for any new machines. It just enables the existing machines to remain and for the existing community funding to remain. In New Zealand, our problem gambling rate nationally is extremely low. It's only 0.2% of the adult population. The Ministry of Health that funds the treatment providers, the face-to-face counselling services, the 0800 help desk, the text services, the email services, the chat lines, they require all the treatment providers to keep a record of the people that go and see them and use their services. So when you use the text service or the phone service, first thing they'll ask you is what territorial authority you're located in, and a record's kept of that. In the last 2 years, which is the most recent data we've got, there was absolutely no new clients presented from the Rangitikei district for problem gambling. And that's in relation to all forms of gambling, not just simply playing on a gaming machine. Next slide, please. There is no link between gaming machine numbers and problem gambling rates. Over the last 10 years, we've had a quarter of our machines reduced due to natural attrition. We've lost over 4,500 machines. However, in that same 10-year, decade-long period, the problem gambling rate has remained exactly the same. Next slide, please. There is, however, considerable benefits that come from having the machines. The machines generate extremely valuable community funding. In 2023, the local grants made were $1.1 million to your district. In addition to that, there's the benefit that comes from regional grants and national grants. Having the machines is also a popular form of entertainment, and almost 70% of adult New Zealanders gamble at least once a year as a form of recreation, a form of entertainment. The next slide just deals with the ATM. So it's very unusual to have such a requirement in a policy. The current policy and the proposed policy would prevent a venue relocating to a site which is within 100 metres of an ATM. That is effectively going to be a ban on any site being able to relocate, given how common the non-bank, non-branded ATMs are now. The policy is also ineffective. If there's no ATM in a venue or close to a venue, people can just simply walk out of the gaming room, walk up to the bar and obtain cash out through the EFTPOS facility. So it's not a prohibition on actually obtaining cash. The policy is also very, very ineffective in that council could look at the various regions, say, yes, currently there's no ATMs within 100 metres, grant the consent, and then over the next several months, nearby venues could install ATMs, or the venue itself could install an ATM, and council would have no ability to revoke or change that consent that's been granted. It's also just difficult to keep a track of ATMs these days, again, given how common the non-bank, non-branded ATMs are. Finally, just touching on online gambling. Online gambling's huge and getting even bigger. So if council was to adopt a more restrictive policy, regardless we had as to whether that is likely to reduce problem gambling or whether it will in fact just simply accelerate the migration of the physical spend into the online offering. The next slide talks about how popular online gambling is. So 27% of adults currently participate in some form of online gambling, with 19% of that group doing so weekly. And we had a real life experience with COVID. Sky City has an online based offshore casino. Pre-COVID, the annual spend was 254 million. When all the physical venues were closed as a result of COVID, that spend leapt up to $793 million. So we saw an instant migration from the land-based offering through to the online-based offering. And that's only going to get worse. Thank you. It's only going to get worse with the government confirming that as early as February 2026, so less than a year away now, there will be at least 15 online licenses granted. They'll go predominantly to offshore-based providers, and they will be able to advertise freely in New Zealand. And last slide, online gambling. Having the migration through to online gambling is, of course, undesirable. There's absolutely no local grants that come from that currently. And under the government's proposed system, there'll be no local grants that come from the new licensing system. There's no local employment. The prize is a lot larger than our $500 prize or $1,000 prize if the machine's jackpot. And there's a lot more inducements to gamble.
Thank you.
Thank you for your attention.
Questions?
Yes, thank you, Jared. Andy here. I'm just interested in your definition around what is a sensitive area. And if I refer to page 28 of your submission, where it says in terms of transitioning, this would allow venues to move to lower deprivation areas and away from residential areas / sensitive sites. So we hear evidence that the problem is one of gambling for the low socioeconomic sector. Why would they then not be referred to as a sensitive site if that is the issue?
Well, I think if I was a councillor and I was considering this, I would be considering the merits of a policy that enabled people to come to council and consider the application on a case-by-case basis. So you can see exactly where you're going from site A to site B. You know your district well, and you'll be able to make a common sense decision as to whether that's a more desirable site. Because there will be a whole range of factors that come into play. What's the deprivation area? How close they are to residential areas? The size of the venue, the type of its current clientele. Will that clientele change with the new offering? But also, as far as sensitive sites, how close are we to parks? How close are we to libraries? How close are we to schools, early childhood centres? I think all of those things come into play. And I think council has the ability, sensibly, on a case-by-case basis to work out what areas would be more suitable.
Thank you. We've got time for one more question.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, just interesting, you've highlighted in your paperwork and you've shown it on the screen of what we got here, the Te Rapa Tavern. Can you tell me how many gaming machines were at the Te Rapa Tavern when it was on its old site and how many were on the new site?
It had 18 at its old site, and it was able to relocate and retain its 18 machines as a result of the Maori Party's amendment, which enabled sites to relocate and retain their machines. So it took the full 18 machines, and it was only able to invest in the significant fit out that happened back then because it had the economic benefit that came from retaining those machine numbers.
Okay, so the machine numbers, sorry, Chair, if I may, didn't increase?
No, they're not allowed to increase.
Okay, under the
The
same policy.
legislation doesn't allow them to increase, but they're allowed to stay the same.
Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Jared. Sorry, we can't take any more questions, but thank you for your submission. Our staff, our team will get back to you once a decision has been made. But thank you very much for that.
Thank you so much. Cheers.
Thank you. So our next presenter is Emma Williams, and Emma, and we are way ahead of time, but if you'd like to come to the table.
And my colleague Sally's going to join us as well. Thank you.
You got a chair?
I don't.
There's one coming to the scenes. Well, you got one?
Thank you very much.
And
Emma and Sally, yeah.
Oh, well, just to say that, welcome you both, to our council meeting today. You've got 10 minutes to present, to give your presentation. I'll let you know, after 8 minutes, I'll let you know that you've got 2 minutes to go, or if you're still presenting at that time, and then there's an opportunity for councillors to ask questions as they may wish. So we'll hand the time over to you. Hold on.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ramahi for having us here today. My name is Emma Williams and this is Sally Dara. We're both health promoters for National Public Health Service. I'm a health promoter in Wanganui region, and Sally works over in Palmerston North. Tēnā koutou. Yes, so we're here today to give our oral submission on your gambling venues policy. So if we could just go to the next slide, please. Cool. So Health New Zealand supports option 2 of changing to a sinking lid policy. And in addition to that, limiting relocations to defined areas based on deprivation or not allowing relocations at all. When clubs merge, the number of Class 4 gaming machines can only be existing total for one venue, not the sum of both venues. And we would just really recommend to have a look at the wording in section 7.2 in the draft policy, just to make it clear the maximum number of machines permitted when venues do merge. Thank you. Next slide. So as pointed out, there's been $3.4 million worth of money gone in the Rangatike district area in the gaming machine profits, and that's actually up from 270 approximate thousand from 2022. So we do see an increase there, which is concerning. Next slide, please. Cool. And when we think about that $3.4 million that's come out of the Rangatike district, we do see that 1.1 has been given back in grants, to community grants, but we would really like to sort of to highlight where maybe those grants have come from. Often what we can see is high deprivation areas putting in a lot of money, and then those grants going to areas that don't, or people or clubs that don't experience the kind of deprivation that other communities might do.
And often it's those kind of clubs in the higher sort of income areas who've actually got the capacity to apply for those grants. So that's quite a big factor. Like, you know, people that are struggling day to day, they don't have the capacity to be doing that so much.
Next slide, thank you. Yeah, so as we spoke about, the high deprivation communities putting in a lot of money in those grants, possibly going to clubs and people that aren't experiencing the same amount of deprivation. What we see nationally in Aotearoa is that 74% of money spent on pokies comes from high deprivation areas, and only 12% of those grants, of that grant pool, is returned to those high deprivation areas. We see a real inequity within those numbers.
And quite a number of the grants too are often like for sports or creative type things, and not so many go back to the like our food bags or our social services, those kind of things that could actually you know, reduce or balance off the harm perhaps.
Yeah, because we do see that, you know, the level of harm from Class 4 gambling is not offset by the proceeds that go back into communities. So I think that's a really good point. Next slide, please. Cool. So gambling related harm. So we know that there are harm that comes with gambling for some people. So in 2016, the Health and Lifestyle Surveys found that 50% of 0.3% of people who played pokies in pubs or clubs at least once a month experienced some level of gambling harm. So that's something that they've identified within for themselves. And we know that the Rangitikei area has medium to high deprivation levels. And when we think about the challenges that some of our communities are facing now and they have been for a long time, that harm can be exacerbated by the effects that come from gambling. So there can be strongly correlated with family or partner violence from the stress of losing money and the stress of that survival, what's going to happen next, how we're going to get money for the next, for food and those kind of things. So half of problem gamblers reported having experienced some form of family violence. And we do have a bit of an issue actually understanding what the accurate data is and the prevalence of problem gambling. It's not really there. The previous speaker spoke about Rangitikei didn't have any callers to the helplines there. But what we know within the health system is that there isn't actually a lot of screening that happens for problem gambling. So, we often have screening for family violence or smoking or alcohol related harm. But the questions around gambling harm isn't really there. So that leaves a lot of gaps in the ability to be able to record that data, how much harm is actually happening through that and how many people are actually being affected by gambling related harm.
And that's even across like our addiction services as well. So somebody who maybe is getting some assistance for alcohol or drug related addictions is not necessarily asked those questions about gambling as well, and sometimes they will go together.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and so there is a real gap there that we need to be aware of for our communities and the services and help that they can actually get for this. But I would really like and encourage councillors to, I've brought a couple of copies from Iwi Health Service Te Oranganui and Wanganui. So they've done an amazing report on the insights about gambling harm, and that's with their communities. And there's some lived experiences within these documents, so I'd really encourage you to read those. And those lived experiences are talking about things like addictions to methamphetamine and the sale of methamphetamine and then using those in pokies, family-related harm, and self-harm as well. So, I would really encourage you to read these documents and get a real picture of what could possibly be happening in our communities. Cool. Next slide. Thank you. And when we think about the amount of money, the 3.4 million a year in Rangitikei, that averages out to just over $9,000 per day. And that's money which could have been spent in local homes and businesses. And we know that the area is a medium-high socioeconomic deprivation. So, and just imagine that $10,000 a day being able to be spent in our retail stores and in other areas, being able to put bread and milk and butter and all those things in the household. So when we think about that, it's a large amount of money for our Rangitikei region. Next slide. So we're advocating for the sinking lid policy, and there is a number of other territorial authorities in the lower half of North Island that have adopted the sinking lid policies, such as Porirua Council, Kapiti Coast, and the Hutt City Council. So we'd just really like to encourage councillors to talk with some of those other councillors within those councils about how the sinking lid policy has worked for them.
2 minutes.
2 minutes. And the no mergers or relocations. What did you want to speak on that a little
Sure.
bit? Yeah.
So I guess it's just the same message that there are quite a number of councils as well who have gone down that road, and for the reasons of a lot of those machines being in high deprivation areas. So it would be, again, I would encourage you to talk to other councils who have have implemented those.
Excellent. Oh, well, we've got maybe time for a couple of questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Simon.
Being health professionals, have you any comment regarding where pokies tend to sit in our community? They tend to sit in pubs and clubs, where it's alcohol related, and do you have any comment as to where they sit? Or could they sit somewhere else if?
It's a good question. It's probably something that needs to be determined by central government. I mean, is it something that you actually have any control over?
It's an R18 environment, from what I gather, to play them, so. That's the one R18 environment that we tend to have is the pubs and clubs. But there is a, the previous person just talked about harm minimisation and how they actively want to do that. However, where they sit is harm in itself.
And I think when you think about the rangateke, here in Martin and Bulls and, the CBD is quite small and, there is that medium to high deprivation within your community. So that relocation is quite already close to the deprivation. So that's quite a difficult thing to answer. But, we do see that some communities are targeted. Well, probably I shouldn't say targeted. We do see within communities there's saturations of harmful commodities. I would just sort of really think about when we go to certain communities and certain places, how much of that harm can we see, those harmful commodities can we see?
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, our team that's us up. So thank you, and our team will be
Oh,
there.
good, thank you.
with you.
Right.
Thank you very much.
No, thank you.
Kia ora.
All right, so we're going to welcome Ben Hodges, who is part of New Zealand Community Trust, who's our last oral submitter today. Tēnā koe, Ben, welcome to the Rangitikei District Council for our oral submissions. You have 10 minutes to submit. And saying that if you're still speaking up until 8 minutes, I'm going to let you know, because that gives you an opportunity for any of the councillors around the table to ask questions. Ka pai? We'll leave it. Time's over to you.
Kia ora tātou. NZCT supports your proposal to roll over your existing cap policy and with relocations permitted. It's sensible and balanced policy that ensures your district can continue to enjoy and benefit from Class 4 gambling entertainment and the resulting community grants. Just to remove any lingering interest in adopting a sinking lid, I'm going to use my time to explain why sinking lids are blunt and ineffective tools to reduce problem gambling rates. I'll also talk about how important it is that Class 4 remains in your community for the good it brings. If I could have that first slide up, please. Since 2003, many TLAs have adopted a sinking lids, and there's been an 11,000 or 44% drop in machine numbers as a result. The red line at the bottom shows that the rate of problem gambling among adults was a low 0.4% in 2007. Then you jump to 2018 and Health New Zealand found that the rate to be barely different at 0.2%. So it's really very clear that there is no correlation between sinking lid policies and reducing harm. Sinking lids may reduce expenditure, but that isn't the same thing as reducing harm. And the problem is that a sinking lid would eventually cancel out pokie grants, which in 2023 totaled more than $1 million in your community. This is funding that helps employ not-for-profit personnel to do good things across your district, that injects money into your retail and service providers when the grants are spent, and overall helps non-profit organisations make Rangitikei a happier, healthier and more connected community. Revenue from our gaming also supports your local hospitality sector to be sustainable, funds the problem gambling levy and provides GST. Who in Rangitikei would replace this funding were a sinking lid eventually to succeed in ending pokie grants? Council was really about the only alternative, and to do so, you'd need to lift rates by a further 3% based on 24-25 rates, which I understand is already up more than 10% on the previous year. I'm sure no one likes the sound of that, but that is ultimately where you'd head to if you adopted a sinking lid. Now, you heard today that sinking lid policies around the country haven't affected grant returns because pokey spend is up. But that's incorrect. Pokey expenditure is actually down in Rangitikei and around the country when you adjust for inflation. And it's down even more on a per capita basis when you factor in population growth. Because of scale, large urban areas can sometimes absorb the loss of a venue or two in terms of grant returns, but that won't be the case in Rangitikei. Your community groups would be hurt by a sinking lid, and the closure of just one of the 5 venues would have a dramatic effect on the level of grants. You may also hear an argument, well, you did hear an argument, that pokies creates a flow of money from the poor to the rich. But the fact is that that argument relies on a loose interpretation of the deprivation index. I'll explain. Pretty much all the gaming venues in your district are in the very centre of town, and that's largely the case throughout New Zealand. Most town centres measure high on the deprivation index, despite, or perhaps because, very few people actually live in those central locations. Town centre venues attract patrons from all corners of a given community. So saying a town centre venue is in a high area actually says nothing about the economic circumstances of the people patronising those venues. Could I have the next slide, please? So that same superficial analysis would argue that funds being awarded to the Martin Rugby Club from funds raised from the club hotel is an example of money flowing from the poor to the rich. They can claim that because the rugby club is in a deprivation 6 data mesh block, while the pub is in a deprivation 9. In reality, the two are separated by just 200 metres, and both the pub and the club draws punters or members from all corners of Martin. With this kind of common sense, you can unpick this poor to rich argument right across the country. The argument is as loose as it has been damaging to the reputation of the Class 4 charitable gaming model. Little context about the scale of problem gambling in relation to pokies. About 0.1% of adults have a serious problem with pokies. The inverse of that stat is that 99.9% of adults do not. Compare that with the 2% of adults who are alcoholics. That's 20 times more people than are addicted to pokies. So despite alcohol harm dwarfing that caused by pokey addiction, I don't think many would advocate to adopt a sinking lid policy for pubs. It's obvious that that would be an ineffective harm minimisation strategy. And for the 98% of people who aren't alcoholics, it would be pretty depressing to watch their hospitality options diminishing to zero. A sinking lid policy for pokies is even more indiscriminate. Remember, 99.9% of people are not addicted to pokies. The vast majority of people who play the pokies do so safely and for fun. Just some further comparison. 0.1% of Kiwis are problem pokey gamblers. More than 3 times that number suffer from an addiction to exercise. 20 times more Kiwis suffer from binge eating disorders. These are real addictions that cause serious harm to sufferers and people they know. But again, I don't think anyone would advocate for sinking lids to be applied to exercise and food. That's because, just like gambling, almost everyone who eats and exercises does so in moderation, and it causes no ill effects. Look, whilst 0.1% of adults being problem pokey gamblers, we mustn't ignore their suffering, and we don't. Pokey trusts provide more than $10 million per annum to the Ministry of Health to resource a nationwide network of problem gambling services, including people that you've heard from today. Additionally, we, NZCT, spend $650,000 a year on harm minimisation strategies. These include activities such as staff training, resources and technology. Our strategies are thorough and extensive. For example, every 20 minutes, venue staff must do a sweep of their game room to look for problems and intervene if they see it. They're even required to intervene if they see a punter try and withdraw cash more than once from an in-venue ATM. Finally, advocates for sinking lids will claim that there are links between problem gambling and other negative behaviours like crime, violence and drug use. In fact, there's no evidence that problem gambling causes those other ills. Yes, problem gambling can cluster with those things, but there's zero evidence that gambling is the cause of those other behaviours. Rather than being the cause, it's much more likely that problem gambling is just one aspect of a complex web of mental health issues a person is suffering. It's too simplistic to argue that a sinking lid would make a difference to rates of problem gambling and those other comorbidities. And don't forget that your community's problem gamblers already have access to other gambling options, including online gambling 24/7. Gambling has been around for millennia and it'll never go away, but you can control it, divert some gambling spend to help those that are addicted, and harness that human desire to gamble for community good. That's what the Class 4 gambling model provides, and your balanced policy provides a sustainable environment for that to continue. Just as a final slide, we've got just some of the grants that organisations that have benefited from grants in your community. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions from around the table, please? Well, we don't have any questions from around the table. But thank
I'll
you.
just take a little bit of the remaining time, if that's okay then. You also heard today a comment about 30% of the money being spent on game machines coming from those that can least afford to lose it. But the best I can tell is that stat comes from an article written by some students at Massey University, which haven't actually been and wasn't attributed to any research elsewhere. So I'm still trying to understand that stat. So I'd just be cautious about that statistic. Finally, just a comment from the social assessment paper that was written by your team. It's a little bit. Table 11 says that in 2019, NZCT gave away $1.3 million in Rangitikei. That's actually incorrect. That's a central government data processing error. It was actually zero because we didn't have a venue in Rangitikei in 2019. We do now have one, and the grants are starting to be awarded as our awareness of our presence rises.
Thank you, Ben. We've actually got a question from the Mayor.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm just intrigued a little bit around the definition of a problem gambler. So that problem gambler is identified by how? In other words, somebody declares that they've got a problem and goes and asks for help. They are then declared to be a problem gambler. But there's a chance that 20 people have a problem and only one of them goes for help. How's that?
Yeah. So there are different levels of harm identified from serious or problem gamblers down to mild or low. I don't have the definitions in my head for the high, but mild gambling harm, I think this is on the Problem Gambling Foundation's website, is defined as someone who experiences a low level of problems with few or no negative consequences. For example, they may occasionally spend more than their limit or feel guilty about their gambling. So that's mild, and then low will be less than that. The serious problem gamblers, the 0.2% of all gambling types, are considered problem gamblers where they have serious effects on their life and those around them. And we give that, the sector gives $10 million plus a year to the Ministry of Health to use towards their problem gambling strategy, which, as proven by the statistics, unfortunately has not been particularly effective in the last 20 years at reducing harm. I'd really encourage the Ministry of Health to look at their strategy.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you for that. Ben.
No problem.
Our team will get back in touch with you once a decision has been made at our next policy and planning meeting in April.
Sure, Tato. Thank you.
All submissions, but these recommendation that the report hearing of submissions on the draft gambling venue Class 4 and venue crossing received. Thank you. And Mia. Oh, sorry, ending. Oh, all in favour?
Aye.
Say aye. Right, carried. Oh, thank you everyone for your time. Thank you for those people that have submitted, that are still here. I'm going to declare our meeting closed. So I'm going to do a karakia to close our hui first. He inoi tātou, kia tau, kia tātou katoa. Kia whao tō tātou araki a iwi kaiti. Me te aroha o te atua, me te whiwhinga tahitanga, te wairua tapu, mō ake, āmene, kia ora.